Today is January 26, 2021, the one-year anniversary of the day the NBA stood still.
Good afternoon from New York. We're coming on the air with breaking news, very sad news to tell the sports world. The LA Times is reporting that retired Los Angeles Lakers basketball star Kobe Bryant has been killed in a helicopter crash.
This was a massive blow to the NBA world and just the world in general. The impact that Kobe had on the players in the league, his fans, and especially the people who knew him cannot be overstated. And today I wanted to remember Kobe, not just the tragedy, but the life that Kobe lived, his NBA career, and his impact on others, and talk about how all of that impact was so significant that his death made the NBA world stand completely still. Kobe in his youth was the epitome of the word cocky, and this was a source of criticism for him back then, but the thing is, while maybe it was egotistical and arrogant to some, was Kobe's attitude really cocky if he went out and accomplished everything that he said that he would? My favorite Kobe quote spells this out perfectly. When you make a choice and say, come hell or high water, I am going to be this, then you should not be surprised when you are that. When Kobe was young, he decided what he was going to be, and was unapologetic about getting there with an indescribable tenacity. And then when he proved himself right, he was not surprised, because he had already decided this is what would happen, and then he made that so. Kobe was never one to shy away from the moment and the attention, as he proved a million times over in his career. After being touted as the best high school basketball player of all time to some, Kobe had to decide if he wanted to play college or jump right up to the highest level as a 17-year-old kid, and Kobe, cocky as always, made that decision.
Kobe Bryant, have decided to take my talent to No, I have decided to skip college and take my talent to the NBA.
Kobe's NBA career did not get off to a blazing start. He was a bench player who only got about 15 minutes per game, but Kobe, being the guy that he was at that age, still found a way to steal the spotlight to the point where his teammates started calling him Showboat. And he really leaned into that persona by participating in the dunk contest at just 18 years of age.
Bases. So Kobe will dunk and then so will the other two. Then they'll do it one more time. Oh, between the legs! Kobe Bryant!
Look at him. Yes. Check him out. Check him out.
His rookie season, however, ended on a down note that would define his career. After playing just 13 minutes per game in the playoffs, suddenly when the Lakers were down 3-1 to the Utah Jazz, they gave Kobe the opportunity to close out the game, and it didn't go very well.
Bryant drives, pull out, shot on the way, no good. 12 of those rebounds to go to overtime. Wide right, Van Exel fakes, knock away, cross court left, open Kobe Bryant for three, another air ball. He shoots back-to-back air ball, Jazz basketball. Backs it out, straight away to Kobe Bryant. Bryant for three, it's short again, air ball. All over, 8 seconds, 7 seconds. Here's a three-pointer, air ball again. From Kobe Bryant, another air ball. 4 seconds left. It's over. It's over.
But what matters is that in this game, what Kobe showed is the confidence to take those shots. And after airball after airball after airball, Kobe didn't hesitate to come up the court and shoot it again.
Utah game, everybody talks about those air balls. I wasn't mad at you. That's why I was the first one to come grab you and say, hey, I know everybody's laughing and giggling out, but one day people will fear you at the end of the game.
But ending that season on a low note or not, there was still immense hype around Kobe and the player that he could be.
This is my man. This is my man. This is Showboat. We call him Showboat, but y'all know him as Kobe Bryant. This is my main man. But this kid right here, mark my words, now, and I said this earlier in the season, it's going to be unbelievable. I mean, and I'm not saying that because he's here. I see him every day in practice. I know. I see him every day in practice. I see how this kid works. I see how he, after practice, how he's still in the gym before practice. I know he goes to Pacific Palisades and shoots in their gym after school. he is just a tremendous talent.
In his second year, Kobe was given more opportunity on the Lakers. While he didn't earn the start yet, he did earn a 6-man role where he would average 15 per game and 18 a game before the All-Star break. And that 18 at the age of 19, combined with Kobe's incredible popularity, not only landed him a spot in the All-Star game, but a starting spot in the West, making him the youngest starter in All-Star game history. And Kobe would come to play in that All-Star game where, matched up against Michael Jordan, he would put up 18 points in 22 minutes, and he scored those 18 points in the way you'd expect someone nicknamed Showboat to do. Unfortunately, however, the '98 season wouldn't be too pleasant for the Lakers overall, who, featuring one of the league's premier players in Shaquille O'Neal, would once again fall short to the Utah Jazz in the playoffs, this time in the conference finals, which would further eat at the team and Shaq in particular. In the '99 season, the Lakers would undergo some changes. Nick Van Exel would leave the team for the Nuggets, and Eddie Jones would be traded to the Charlotte Hornets, freeing up plenty of shooting guard minutes for Kobe, allowing him to start where he would average 20 points per game in a lockout season. However, these changes would not help the Lakers overall, as their win percentage saw a dip, as did their defense, and this would show itself in the '99 playoffs, where they would get swept by the eventual champion San Antonio Spurs, leading to even more frustration from Kobe and Shaquille O'Neal. Frustration from not only not meeting the mark, but also seeing the potential that there was between these two that was not being delivered on. Luckily, however, the Lakers would make an addition to really unlock that potential in the '99 offseason, and no, it was not a player, it was the Zen master himself, Phil Jackson. The legendary coach who helped Michael and Scottie win 6 was here to help Shaq and the quote-unquote next Michael Jordan win some themselves. The addition of Phil, as well as another year of development for a now 21-year-old Kobe, made the Lakers a powerhouse. The team won 67 games, Shaq won MVP, Kobe made his second All-Star appearance, and they took care of business in the playoffs. Round 1, they would have the Kings, a team the Lakers would have a notable battle with later. That series would go very well for Kobe, who would average 28 points alongside Shaq's 29 and 17. Round 2, they made very short work of the Jason Kidd Suns, but in the conference finals, they had an interesting matchup. The Portland Trailblazers, who had a team made up of a bunch of really good players. No standout superstar caliber guy, but it was a deep team that played basketball the right way, which led them to 59 wins and a top 5 offense and defense. This series would come down to a close Game 7. The Lakers had a minor lead to close the game out and needed one more bucket to seal this series and earn a finals appearance. And then Kobe, with the greatest perimeter defensive player of all time, at least at that point, on him, well, you know what he did. Kobe was heading to his first finals appearance, where he and the Lakers would meet the Indiana Pacers. With Michael Jordan's Bulls out of the way, Reggie Miller and the Indiana Pacers were finally able to break out of the Eastern Conference. Unfortunately for them, though, going into this series, there was very little reason to believe that this team could actually beat the Lakers. They didn't have anyone who could guard Kobe, and they especially did not have anyone that could guard Shaq. But the Pacers could do something to give them a chance, and that was to intentionally injure Kobe. Jalen Rose, when contesting a mid-range jumper from Kobe in Game 2, intentionally slid his foot under his landing space, which led to an injury. As a result of this injury, Kobe played pretty damn bad in this series as a whole, statistically speaking, averaging 15 a game on garbage splits, when previously in the playoffs he was averaging 23 on good splits. However, this injury and the context it gives to this series is often left out of the discussion from people who would like to perpetuate the narrative that Kobe was just carried by Shaq. But when you remove the Game 2 that he had where he played just 8 minutes, he still averages 19, just not on the best efficiency. But more importantly than that, in Game 4, Shaq fouled out in overtime, with this being on Indiana's home court. So with a chance to take a 3-1 lead, which at this point would guarantee a win in the finals, the Lakers were without their best player. But that would not matter, as Kobe would proceed to carry the Lakers offense in overtime.
Be able to knock down that shot. It will be up to Kobe Bryant and company to do it without O'Neal. Oh, and what a start for Kobe. Advantage, under a minute and a half to play. In overtime, Kobe pulls up. Hits again. Off into the lane. Tough shot. Tip back in. Guess who?
and after taking a 3-1 lead, the Lakers would win the series, meaning Kobe just got his first ring, as did Shaquille O'Neal. Unfortunately, however, winning this ring gave the two completely different mindsets. To Kobe, this was only more motivation to get better. To Shaq, now that he had achieved this goal, it was time to chill.
One thing I know I got a guy that's going to be ready. So I admit a lot of times I didn't come into camp ready, because that's just how I got down. Because my thing is, I don't need to get ready for dunking. Right. I don't need to get ready. I'll get ready when I get ready. So because I had you, I was able to just chill out into something. Do what I do.
See, that's what pissed me off. That was it right there. That was.
Listen, I got beat up. I got hack and shack. I was tired, man. I ain't doing no work. I'm going home. I'm swimming. Me and Uncle Jerome, we sipping pina coladas, we eating burgers.
My ass is in the gym 10 hours a day.
This was the main source of the beef between these two that started here and would only worsen with time. Kobe's drive to improve after that first ring really showed itself in the 2001 season. In his sit-down with Shaq, Kobe said his mindset in Game 4 versus the Pacers, where he had that performance, was that he wanted to win that one because of the work that Shaq did for it on top of his own desires.
Well, you know, I knew how much it meant to you, right? As brothers, you don't let your brothers down, right? It wasn't my time yet. This championship was yours, right? Because you had worked hard to get us to this point, right? For your whole career in Orlando and all the disappointments, and here you are. And it's my responsibility to pick that up.
But 2001, yeah, it was officially Kobe time. Kobe, before this, was a hell of a player, but this was the first year that he was a bona fide superstar and a fucking killer.
Throughout the playoffs, Bryant, and the tip off the follow. By Don George. Kobe in the front court, snapping, Bryant around, crystal ball. Drive in deep to the base. He's underneath. He scores with a slam dunk. Kobe goes the other way, the dribble turn, shoot, 10-footer, good. Wow. No doubt about it. Trying to get over the airplane. And there's a foul.
Kobe's rise to the top, alongside Shaq, still being the dominant player he was, made this duo something to fear. Combining for an average of 57 points per game, as you can imagine, the Lakers were very good once more. Now, it didn't show as much this time in the regular season, as the Lakers actually won 11 less games that year. However, this team was ridiculous in the playoffs, losing a grand total of one game in the entirety of the playoffs, with Kobe and Shaq averaging 59.8 points in the playoffs as a duo, 29.4 for Kobe and 30.4 for Shaq. Truly the greatest duo of all time, at the very least at their peaks. The 2002 season was more of the same. Kobe and Shaq were great, and there was still some underlying drama, but for the most part, the team was winning, so things were not getting too bad. However, things didn't go as smoothly as they did in 2001 for sure, as while the first two rounds were not all that difficult for the Lakers, who swept the Blazers in round 1 and gentlemen swept the Spurs in round 2, they ran into a difficult spot with the Sacramento Kings. This would go down as one of the best playoff series of all time, as well as probably the most controversial of all time. This Kings team played very well as a unit. They didn't beat the Lakers in the overall talent department because, well, no team in the league could beat them there, but they played amazing as a team and were very deep. Chris Webber was one of the most underrated players ever in my opinion. He was a walking bucket as well as an amazing playmaker for a 4. Peja Stojakovic was one of the best shooters of the early 2000s. Mike Bibby was a solid all-around point guard. Doug Christie was a great defender and a solid offensive player. He could score at a decent rate and was a good passer. Vlade Divac was solid all around and yet another playmaker on this team as a center. And Bobby Jackson and Hedo Turkoglu were both really good bench scorers and shooters. That was a lot of names that I just said, and when you add to it that practically everyone on this team was a good and willing passer, that made this one of the best offensive teams in the league, as well as a solid defense with great communication. So as a result, while the Lakers were the favorite, the Kings were expected to put up a fight, and they did. The series went 7 games in favor of the Los Angeles Lakers, and to many, it should have gone the other way, because this series had a good handful of questionable calls, the most egregious one being this inbound play where Kobe basically just trucks Mike Bibby with no whistle blown. But series rigged, or at the very least poorly officiated or not, the Lakers got by this team, and waiting for them in the finals was the 0-2 New Jersey Nets, who sucked. Like, the 2002 Eastern Conference was pathetically weak, so the conference finals was the real fight, while in the finals, this series was an easy sweep, where Shaq won a rather easy finals MVP, averaging 36 points per game because he was being guarded by Todd McCoach. I don't fucking know. His nickname was Big Mac. Like, that was obviously not going to work. The next year for Kobe and the Lakers is one that is often ignored within the context of this duo and this team. Like, it seems like people jump from the three-peat to 2004, but fun fact, 2002 and 2004 has a year in between it. It's called 2003. Mind-blowing, I know. This season would actually really start the divide between Kobe and Shaq on the court. Previous to this, their beef was mostly off of the court. But to start this year, Shaq was out with an injury that he was managing on quote-unquote company time. So gradually, the offense started shifting more into Kobe's favor, and there was a period of time where he just went absolutely ballistic. Kobe averaged over 44 points per game in a 9-game stretch on incredible efficiency. Meanwhile, Shaq wasn't playing as well as in years past, and with Kobe getting all of the media's attention and praise, according to Phil Jackson, they were starting to lose him.
Phil calls me to his office, goes, "Hey, you know, we're starting to lose the big fella." What do you mean? Well, he's not getting the attention. You know, this 40-point streak is starting to kind of take away his fire to prove something, right? So I need you to start dialing it back. I'm like, what? He says, "We're going to lose him, and we need him in June." Okay. All right.
So now there was a power imbalance between the two, which there always was, but it really showed itself this year. And it impacted this team's title hopes, as they would lose in the second round to the San Antonio Spurs, as Tim Duncan was in the midst of pulling off one of the greatest carry jobs in NBA history, as he averaged 28, 11, and 5, and played great defense on Shaq, holding him to just 25 points per game. Meanwhile, Kobe played well, averaging 32, but with Shaq not being the dominant force that he was in the past few years, it just simply was not enough. So now the Lakers weren't looking all that great, and their solution was trying to build a super team. And just to be clear, super team is in quotes in this script because they added Gary Payton and Karl Malone in free agency, which would have made them a super team a few years ago, but now they were both basically on their way to a retirement home. But this was a good team, and as a result, they found their way back to the finals, where this time around they would beat the Spurs in the second round. Then the Lakers would meet the 2004 Pistons. See, this team really was the perfect matchup for the Lakers in retrospect. Similar to the 2002 Kings and the 2000 Blazers, the best way to give this duo issues was not by out-talenting them, because that was impossible. There wasn't a team in the league that was going to have more talent than the Lakers. The only problem the Lakers had was how much they leaned on this duo and this talent rather than the team as a whole. The way the Pistons took down the powerhouse Lakers was they were a team, when the Lakers at that point really were not. The duo of Kobe and Shaq self-destructed, and because the Lakers were basically nothing without those two, we saw the Pistons take advantage. Unfortunately, however, as good as the Pistons did play, the main thing to blame for this loss was that self-destruction, because Kobe and Shaq's off-of-the-court beef started to bleed onto the court in this series. They just stopped playing together as a duo. They were both playing, but they were playing for themselves, and the issues with these two really started to reach their breaking point in that series. Pair that with one of the greatest defenses in league history, and you had a recipe for disaster. Now, the fallout from this series was pretty drastic. Underlying all of this turmoil between Kobe and Shaq was also Shaq's new contract, which with him being 31, having injury and weight issues, beef with their young superstar, and with them losing in embarrassing fashion in the finals, the writing was on the wall for Shaq to be headed elsewhere, and he did. He was sent to the Miami Heat, and now Kobe was a solo act in Los Angeles. The post-Shaq period in Kobe's career was certainly an interesting one. A time of not much winning, but a whole lot of buckets.
But you may want to keep an eye on his back. He's not completely 100%. Oh.
Remember, Mike Krzyzewski was going to be the guy. It could have been his job. He got a pass on it. Here goes Kobe, and Kobe's able to put one in.
74.
Oh, Kobe hammers it home.
In the 2005 season, the Lakers were real bad. On top of Shaq leaving, Phil Jackson left, as he always had a knack for dipping out when things got bad and then showing up right as they got good again. This roster on paper wasn't all too bad. Lamar Odom was a very good power forward and one of the most underrated players of his generation. Caron Butler was a solid scorer, Chucky Atkins was a respectable point guard, and Chris Mim was a passable center. It wasn't a good team, but with Kobe being as good as he was, it should have been okay enough, but they had injury issues. Kobe missed nearly 20 games, as did Lamar Odom, and their coaching situation was real bad to the point where the coach they went into the season with was replaced with an even worse coach. On top of all of that, the Western Conference was incredibly deep, so the team won just 34 games, with the silver lining being that they landed Andrew Bynum in the lottery. Next season though, Phil Jackson came back to the team, and Kobe decided to go thermonuclear in the scoring department. He averaged 35 points per game, winning the scoring title. Oh yeah, and he also did this.
Falling behind even further. Kobe baseline, got it again. Just yo-yoing the dribble, and stops at the top of the key.
They're giving him the ball to see if he can add to it.
Gonna have to play in the third. He pulls up for a three. Yes! 4. Kobe again. Yes, sir! Kobe. Nobody helping right now defensively, so he'll take the 15-footer. Bosh. For 3 again. Yes!
Well, there's 70.
This would be 18 for 20 from the line and an 81-point game.
Now, as many buckets as Kobe got that year, and don't get me wrong, it was a lot, it wasn't translating all that much to team success. While the Lakers were certainly better than they were last year, 45 wins was still not an impressive feat. Now, this was not Kobe's fault. Once more, the talent around him was not ideal, and the West was a bloodbath as always. But the Lakers did at least make a playoff spot this time around, where they faced the Phoenix Suns, where Kobe famously did this.
Bryant with the save. Oh, you gotta get a shot here. Final seconds. Bryant for the win.
But also, the Lakers not so famously did this.
Right now, it is all about the Phoenix Suns. They've come back from a 3-1 deficit and beaten the Lakers in the first round.
And to make this loss even more painful to Kobe after blowing a 3-1 lead, after this, he had to watch Shaquille O'Neal win his 4th ring from his couch. 2007 came around and it was more of the same. Kobe won another scoring title, the Lakers were a lower seed team again, and they lost in the first round to the Suns again. As a result, things got kind of ugly in Los Angeles.
Well, if you don't know how you can move forward in that situation, you're still under contract with them. Are you saying right here on this show that you want to be traded?
Yeah, I would like to be traded, yeah.
There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's not a situation where what if you know, I know before you reportedly said that you would like them to get Jerry West back. Are you saying now emphatically, regardless of what they've done, you want out of Los Angeles?
Yeah, I would like to be traded. As tough as it is to say that, as tough as it is to come to that conclusion, you know, there's no other alternative.
3 years removed from the Shaq trade, the Lakers had not found any real success despite having arguably the best player in the NBA, and that player was far from happy about this. While there was a narrative at the time that all Kobe cared about was scoring, couldn't pass the ball, was always after his, all of that stuff you've heard before, in reality, Kobe prioritized winning overall, and after he came to the conclusion that he wasn't going to be able to do that in Los Angeles, he asked out publicly. And Kobe was shopped around the league as a result, but Kobe had all the power because he had a no-trade clause in his contract. He would have to approve of what team he got traded to, as well as what he was traded for. Kobe didn't want to be traded for everything the opposing team had because he'd just be in a similar situation to Los Angeles. There was a trade lined up with the Pistons that he ended up turning down because he had no desire to play in Detroit. Who can blame him? Then there was a deal with the Bulls that he turned down because he felt the Bulls were giving up too much and he'd just be in a similar situation. And I feel a need to interject here real quick because man, does that kill me. Kobe is my favorite player of all time, and I'm a Chicago Bulls fan, so that just kills me. That hypothetical is my dream, and that ain't happened. Anyways, the point is, Kobe wanted out, but luckily because of Kobe's stinginess, he actually was not traded. He made trading him so difficult for the Lakers that they didn't. And asking for this trade actually helped him because it pushed the Lakers management to be more aggressive about building around him. In the offseason, they brought back Derek Fisher in free agency and traded for Trevor Ariza, and Andrew Bynum took a leap in his third year. That made him one of the better centers in the NBA. This led to the Lakers starting the year off very well, on pace for 50 wins by the trade deadline. However, Kobe still wasn't exactly thrilled about the situation in LA. While the team was better, he was still the lone star in town, but one of the biggest robberies in NBA history would make up for that.
Spanish treasure arrives on the shores of Los Angeles. Last little nugget, simply the biggest NBA in-season trade so far this year, as the Lakers acquired talented big man Pau Gasol from the Grizzlies.
Now, this return actually ended up being good for Memphis in the long run because Pau's brother Mark ended up being pretty damn good, unbeknownst to anybody at the time. But at the time, him and a bunch of scrubs and what would end up being 2 very late first-round picks, it was definitely a steal. And this also meant that Kobe finally had a star teammate for the first time since Shaq, which would make his life a whole lot easier.
What's your reaction to the trade?
I think it's, I think it shows a great deal of commitment, from the organization, I think it's a great step.
While Pau was not some unbelievable talent or even a superstar caliber player, he was just a very good player, and that was all that Kobe really needed. In Pau's debut for the Lakers, he had 24, 12, and 4 on 10 for 15 shooting, while Kobe had just 6 points on 3 for 13 shooting. Easily the worst game he had had in years, and it didn't matter. Even though the Nets team that they were playing wasn't very good, the fact that Kobe could score 6 points and the team could still win seemed like a miracle in comparison to the past few years. In fact, in every game between the Shaq trade and the Pau trade, the lowest amount of points Kobe had scored in a win was 8, and that was only a win because the Nuggets were playing without Carmelo Anthony, and that team was basically useless without him.
Kobe, how nice a feeling is it to know that you can score 6 points and still have a victory come out?
You have no idea. Just make the game so much easier. We had some weapons before. Now we just added a huge one to the team, and we get Big Bynum back. There's a God.
So with Gasol on this team, elevating the Lakers to a new level, Kobe finally won that elusive MVP award. But he was more interested in the more elusive first championship without Shaq. Over the years since that relationship had boiled over and Shaq won one without him, the pressure was on Kobe to win without Shaquille O'Neal. It was that pressure that led to him asking out in the first place. But now Kobe had the team, he had the MVP, and it was time for him to prove himself. And as we know, Kobe was always up for the challenge. So the 2008 playoffs come around. First round, the Lakers beat the Nuggets easily, not even worth mentioning. In the second round, they match up with a very interesting team in the Utah Jazz, led by the offensive duo of Deron Williams and Carlos Boozer, the defensive mastermind Andre Karolinko, the spacing from stretch 5 Mehmet Okur, as well as Kyle Korver. This team was #1 in offense and 12th in defense, and they were coached by the legendary head coach Jerry Sloan. So this team was a threat. The Lakers had the clear-cut best player, but the Jazz were deeper, and as a result, this was a close series that easily could have gone to 7, but luckily Kobe really showed up in this series to make sure it didn't go that way. 33, 7, and 7 on 63% true shooting against one of the better defensive players of his generation. The guy took care of business. Then they get to the Western Conference Finals, where the team that was waiting for them was the defending champion San Antonio Spurs, led by Tim Duncan and the guard tandem of Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker, as well as a supporting cast that was pretty solid with a lockdown defender in Bruce Bowen. And of course, this team was coached by Greg Popovich, meaning this was also a matchup of the 2 greatest coaches of all time. And being that this team won a championship last year after getting through a tough Western Conference, you would expect this to be a close series, but no, it wasn't. I was setting you guys up. This series was a gentleman's sweep. As for why, well, Kobe played great again on offense, and on defense, he gave Manu fits, as he only shot 36% from the field and averaged just 12 points after averaging 20 in the regular season. So the Lakers took care of business and were now headed to the finals, and waiting for them was a hell of a squad. The 2007 offseason was quite an eventful one for the NBA, and the team that ended up being being the biggest story of that offseason was the Boston Celtics. After nearly a decade of the Celtics riding the coattails of Paul Pierce while not giving him a even decent supporting cast, the Celtics actually did something. Well, actually, more accurately, the Celtics did basically everything. First, the team traded for Ray Allen, who had spent the past few years on a very not-so-good Seattle Supersonics team, with Ray being a perennial all-star and at that point the greatest shooter of all time. This was already a huge get in itself. But on top of that, they also traded for Kevin fucking Garnett. Fun fact, Kevin Garnett's middle name is actually fucking. That wasn't just me trying to put on some emphasis here. His name is literally Kevin fucking Garnett. Please do not fact check that. So now the Celtics suddenly went from Paul Pierce and Wally Szczerbiak to Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, and Kevin Garnett. As a result of all of these moves, the C's went from a record of 24-58 to 66-16. They were the very clear-cut favorites. That's not saying the Lakers had no chance, because they unquestionably did, but the general perception here was that, yeah, the Lakers are good, but the Celtics are probably winning this one. Perhaps what made this matchup more interesting, however, is the history that these two franchises had. Lakers versus Celtics is easily the greatest rivalry in the NBA and arguably the biggest in sports. But when you think of Kobe's matchups on the largest stage previous to this, there is no historical context to add more weight to the potential win or loss, unless you want to count the 04 Pistons because of the bad boy Pistons and the Showtime Lakers in the 80s, but I wouldn't, and I don't think anyone was back then either. So what Kobe was heading into was bigger than himself. It now wasn't just him and his team trying to win a championship. It was now yet another chapter in a 6 to 7 decade long rivalry. Games 1 and 2 on the Celtics home court went as expected, which is to say that the Lakers put up a fight, but the Celtics showed themselves to be the better team. In those games, Kobe did not shoot particularly well, but being that the Celtics had the best defense in the league, his poor efficiency wasn't that much of a shock. Game 3 was a bounce back for Kobe and the Lakers as he put up 36-7 on 12 for 20 shooting, and the Lakers won this one in a defensive affair where each score ended up being in the 80s for both teams. But unfortunately for Game 4, Kobe would follow his best game of the series with easily his worst, as he put up only 17 points alongside 10 assists on 6 for 19 shooting. And sadly, this Lakers core around Kobe, without Bynum because he was gone for the playoffs, just simply could not compensate for this poor performance by him, so the Lakers found themselves in a 3-1 deficit, which, as I said earlier, to that point meant a guaranteed win in the finals. And that record would continue, as while Kobe and the Lakers had a bounce back in Game 5, the C's blew them out of the water in Game 6, winning by 39 as Kobe shot just 7 for 22. The Lakers put up a fight, but Boston was clearly better, and Kobe's poor shooting nights did not help that.
Kobe, you won the MVP, you led the team to the finals. How do you characterize this season?
Well, I mean, the goal was to win a championship. You know, it wasn't to win MVP or anything like that. It was to win a championship. So, you know, from that aspect, we failed.
I think it was about a year ago. I think I asked you about the Celtics-Lakers thing. You said it's really never, you've only seen it on TV. Now you've been through it, sort of. Can you talk about what it was like, just the Boston-LA thing and playing the Celtics in the championship?
It sucks.
So naturally, fresh off of this loss, with Kobe being the man that he was, he walked into next season with even more determination and motivation than before. This loss just added more fuel to his fire. The Lakers this year won a whopping 65 games, benefiting from a full season with Gasol and just overall internal improvement. This Lakers team made themselves from a year ago look like garbage in comparison. Round 1 versus the Jazz went by easily. Then in the second round, they had an interesting matchup versus the Rockets, which is seldom talked about for some reason. This series was weird as hell. Bynum and Fisher played like shit, which was probably the main reason why this series was even close, but the two biggest players as well as Lamar Odom played really well. And yet a team with a starting lineup of Aaron Brooks, Shane Battier, Metta World Peace, Ron Artest at the time, Louis Scola, and a combination of Yao Ming for 3 games and Chuck Hayes for 4 games as the starting center. This was a 7-game series. In this series, really the only thing that gets talked about was the famous back and forth between Kobe and Artest, but this series really had no business going to 7 games. Like, a team whose leading scorer for the series is Aaron Brooks pushed this Lakers team to 7 games, which is out of this world, and I don't know why this isn't brought up more. But for the conference finals, the Lakers get the Nuggets, who with Chauncey Billups in place of Allen Iverson had a resurgence, and this series ended up being just a back and forth between Kobe and Melo, seeing who could hit the prettiest mid-range jump shot. And Kobe prevailed in that one, meaning the Lakers were headed to the finals once more, where they could now, as a much better team with Andrew Bynum healthy and the internal improvement, could get their revenge on the Celtics. But they played the Magic. See, unfortunately, KG got injured in the first round of the playoffs, which led to the Celtics losing to Dwight Howard's Magic despite their best efforts. So getting that sweet taste of revenge would not be coming for Kobe quite yet, but he would have an opportunity to finally shut up those critics who said that he could not win without Shaq. And he would shut them up, because for the most part, this Magic team wasn't all that difficult of a matchup. This was the best defense in the league and a respectable offense, but this team just did not have enough experience, nor the best player in the series, so it ended in 5 games. Kobe averaged 32, 6, and 7, and walked away with his first Finals MVP.
And Kobe, how is this different from your previous 3 rings?
Well, I just don't have to hear that criticism, that idiotic criticism anymore. That's the biggest thing. I don't have to hear that stuff anymore.
But Kobe, of course, was not all that satisfied with this. If you remember back to the offseason Kobe had after winning his first ring in 2000, the guy was never one to get his ring and then feel like the job's just completely over. On top of his natural desire to win multiple championships, he also had unfinished business with the team that bested him the year before. And wasting no time, he'd get that chance at revenge in the following season. The Lakers were great again in 2010. Not as successful record-wise as last year, but they were still the favorite in the conference, and in the Western Conference playoffs, they proved this by taking care of the young OKC Thunder, the consistently mediocre Utah Jazz, and the Phoenix Suns in the conference finals. And waiting for the Lakers this time around would of course be the Boston Celtics in the 2010 NBA Finals. Kevin Garnett was back, albeit as a lesser version, as KG was not quite the same after his injury in 2009, but still a very good player. But as a result, they got past the Magic to get another shot at the championship. Unfortunately, however, for the C's, Kobe was not going to let that happen. See, the Magic series win was satisfying, but it wouldn't be as satisfying as taking down the Celtics with all of the history that these two organizations had, and the fact that he had lost to them in the finals in 2008. This series would go down as one of the better in league history, with it going to 7 games. They split the first 4 games, each taking 1 on the opposing court, and in Game 5, the Celtics took the series lead. Game 5s are typically considered to be the most pivotal in a series because generally speaking, most close teams come out 2-2, and Game 5 is where you determine who's really going to win the series, because whoever wins Game 5 only has to win 1 of the next 2, meanwhile the team that's down has to win both of the next 2. The room for error drastically increases once you have that 3-2 lead. But in Game 6, the Lakers killed the Celtics. Not with their offense. If anything, the Lakers had a below average offensive night, but the defense held the Celtics to just 67 points in total on 33% shooting, an absolute lockdown performance. So now we get to a Game 7, the best thing in basketball. This game would be a fucking battle. As it usually was for these two teams, this was a defensive affair and then some. The Lakers shot just 33% from the field and the Celtics shot just 41%. As for how the Lakers made up for that deficit in efficiency, well, they out-rebounded the Celtics. Kobe had shot like crap in this game, 6 for 24, but he grabbed 15 rebounds, including 4 offensive boards. Pau had 19 rebounds in total, and 9 of them were offensive. So even though they could not make their damn shots, they had plenty of second chance opportunities. The Lakers ended up getting 12 more shots in this game as a result, and they would win this game despite that incredible inefficiency. Meaning Kobe and the Lakers had toppled the Celtics, and Kobe had gotten his 5th ring and 2nd Finals MVP, and well, more importantly,
we know what it means as a team, but what about individually for you?
Just got 1 more than Shaq. So you can take that to the bank.
Do you think I was pissed when you got number 5?
Of course you were.
Oh,
no doubt.
I tore my house up.
No doubt. I bet you did.
No, I went crazy. Because when I got 4, you got 4, I was like, hey, I got 4, he got 4, let's trade. When you got that 5th one, and then hold on, you said, I just wanted to get one more.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
TVs.
Yeah. And I said, you know what? Ain't nothing he can do about it either.
After this series, though, there was the pressure to three-peat, a pressure that the Lakers would not live up to, as they would lose 4-0 to the eventual champion Dallas Mavericks in the playoffs in 2011, and to add to that downward trend, Phil Jackson decided to retire, which meant they were now coached by Mike Brown, who was, well, not good. The Lakers were even worse in 2012, and they lost in the second round again, this time to the OKC Thunder, and the dire situation in Los Angeles became increasingly clear. This core that had won 2 championships was just not as good anymore. The supporting pieces had fallen off. The team needed to make some big changes to get back to the highest level, and those changes would be trading for both Dwight Howard and Steve Nash, with Dwight at the time being a top 10 player and Nash being somewhat of a shell of his former self, but clearly still pretty damn good. Doing this after the team was screwed out of landing Chris Paul, something that keeps Lakers fans up at night to this day. But this team was expected to be very good. It was being touted as a super team. Kobe and Dwight alongside with Gasol and freaking Steve Nash as your 4th best player, that is an easy recipe for success. But well, actually it wasn't. For a variety of reasons, it was a recipe for disaster. Nash and Dwight Howard had injuries. Dwight and Gasol was an awkward fit because really this was 2 centers playing together. The NBA just had not made it to that point in its evolution where they realized that was not a good thing. And these injuries, on top of Kobe's mentality clashing with Dwight's more soft and reserved, not as intense persona, led to this team not being very good despite Kobe's best efforts. And Kobe would put in that effort. 2013 was one of the most underrated and best seasons of Kobe's career. He pulled off an incredible carry job. This was the 3rd most efficient offensively Kobe had ever been. He had some of his biggest carry games ever, including a 42-7-12 game where he shot 62% from the field and led the team to a comeback versus the New Orleans Hornets, and a game versus the Portland Trail Blazers where he had 47 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, 4 blocks, and 3 steals on good efficiency, where he played quite literally every second of this game. 48 minutes of regulation, 48 minutes played. Did not sit the entire game. And Kobe was doing all of this at the age of 34. He damn near single-handedly got this team into the playoffs, but unfortunately, he had to give everything to get there.
From their reserves, Bryant again going to work, falls down. Again, he's struggling. He's going to stay down there for a bit. It's hurting, but the Lakers down by 2, and they want him and need him at the free throw line. Got it.
Yeah, not backpedaling or whatever you have to do to get to the other end. If in fact he gets to the other end before a foul, maybe.
Made him.
You've had a pretty unbelievable career. Is this the biggest disappointment of it, considering everything that was involved?
Yeah, by far. We worked so hard, to put ourselves in a position where, we control our own fate, and I certainly have done a lot of work, to prepare myself, and it's just shit luck.
Unfortunately, tearing your Achilles is pretty much guaranteed to drastically affect your career, and that was the case for Kobe. He'd miss all but 41 games of the next 2 seasons, where the Lakers would go into a rebuild. He was able to get a farewell tour in his final year, where he statistically was not good at all, because he just simply was not very good anymore because of the injuries, but he sure as hell did give us a few good memories to end on.
After this game, Coach Popovich, who's the winner, is Kobe. Shows us he has to be dramatic with everything. He gives us a show and has us cheering before his first bucket goes in.
Get behind Myers Leonard, who has 65 for Portland.
Here's Kobe Bryant back on the floor, and once again gets the favorable hop.
Be a part of this moment. Kobe's had an incredible career, and this is an event that he's.
And Team USA slapping the floor here against the Mamba.
Will break Will Chamberlain's record, and now the ovation for Kobe Bryant, who is being substituted for and is being hugged all around by both teams.
As this season came to a close, it really personally started to hit me like, shit, it's actually over, and that was not a good feeling. But Kobe made sure to give us a show on his way out. Even though Kobe by this point had long lost his nickname Showboat, he was still always happy to give people that show, and his last NBA game would be no different. Everyone going into this finals game was definitely expecting something for sure. Shaq even challenged Kobe to drop 50, and a show was expected. We all knew Kobe was going to go out in a spectacular fashion. That's just who he was. We had come to expect that from his legend. But I don't know how many people could have really expected what Kobe gave us.
UB and I anxiously await the email to find out where we're flying. Kobe, nice. Number 2. Foul, Kobe came out. Here he is for 3. He's got the Lakers' last 10. Bryant for 3. One last gamer. Bryant on the move with the jumper. He got it! 58 points!
60 goddamn points. Fun fact. Due to his injuries, aging, and earlier on a more passive role due to more help around him, Kobe had not dropped 60 points since February 2nd, 2009. It had been 7 goddamn years, and on top of that, he hadn't even scored 50 for longer than that. Kobe, when he announced his retirement, said that his body did not have much left to give. He had put everything he had into the game, but his body knew it was time to say goodbye. But in Kobe's last game, the last time he would play on an NBA court after 2 decades of pouring all of his life into it, he reached for whatever his body had left to give. He found everything he had left and laid it all on the line on his way to an electrifying and incredibly memorable 60-point game. And that wraps up the story of Kobe, the basketball player. But now we have to talk about Kobe the man. Post-retirement, Kobe finally got a chance to relax, spend time with his family, as well as contribute to the game however he could from the sidelines, coaching his daughter Gianna's basketball team, training with and giving advice to current players, trying to pass on the lessons he could to the next generation. His ventures as a businessman expanded. He made an investment in an energy drink that added $200 million to his net worth, and most importantly to most was his ventures into being an artist, in both writing as well as a short film that he released that summarized his career and who he was in a way that personally makes me cry almost every time I watch it. Kobe won an Oscar for this amazing piece of art, and it was clear that his potential in this new path in life was pretty damn high, because even if his natural talent wasn't outstanding, we all knew that if he put in the work, Kobe could be great at literally anything. And it was that potential, on top of him starting to get his life outside of basketball as a family man together and sorted, and finally being able to put the time into that he couldn't when he was doing his NBA stuff, that only added more tragedy to his death. The title of this video / documentary, whatever the hell this thing ended up being, is The Day That the NBA Stood Still. And that's because that genuinely is what seemed to happen. Like, seeing the news on Twitter, followed by the collective grieving on a mass scale, all of the anecdotes from players, former and current, the clips of NBA players reacting to the news, all of this shit was so fucking shocking. It hit the NBA world like a ton of bricks. The biggest reason outside of his death just coming in a generally shocking fashion is that Kobe was genuinely like a god figure to people. Silly or not, the guy seemed larger than life. Of course, everyone dies, but I mean, Kobe wasn't everyone. Kobe was Kobe. The pit in my stomach that day was insane. Hell, I feel that pit from time to time when I think about it to this day. I have moments where I'm just sitting there and I have no real thoughts, and suddenly my brain goes, bam, Kobe's dead, and I just sink into that pit. And as I said in my 2020 season mini doc where I briefly talked about Kobe's death, I felt joy simultaneously through the grief that day as I saw everyone talking about what Kobe meant to them, to the point where this tragic death quickly became a celebration of his life. Don't be sad because it's over, be happy that it happened. Expressing that appreciation for Kobe is the whole damn point of this video. After his death, there was a lot of discussion around Kobe's legacy, what he meant for basketball and for the world, and honestly, even though I spent a long ass time going over Kobe's career, his incredible moments, many achievements, achievements and records, that's not Kobe's legacy. That's just the window dressing on top of what his real legacy is, and that legacy is hard work and perseverance. Everything Kobe did in his career was just evidence of what really mattered, which is who he was. Kobe Bryant to me is the clearest example of hard work beating talent in NBA history, maybe just in life in general. Kobe from the very beginning had the mentality required to be great. Sure, being 6'6" and pretty athletic helps, but really the average NBA player is quite literally 6'6" to 6'7" and pretty athletic. And most NBA players are not Kobe, to put it mildly. Everything from Kobe, from his play style to his mentality, the way he talked to his teammates, screamed laying it all on the line at every moment. Kobe was going to give everything he had, and then he was going to find some more because shit, there's probably something more to give in there somewhere. And that's why so many people grew attached to Kobe. They saw a man they knew was determined to be great, and they watched him be great. You can talk about who the greatest player of all time is all you want, and for the record, I do not believe Kobe is the greatest of all time, but the title of the hardest working player of all time is pretty damn clear to me. When players had to match up with Kobe, there were ways they could beat him. They could out-physical him. Hell, you could probably even outsmart him from time to time. But no one, and I mean no one, was going to outwork and out-effort Kobe. There's not a moment that you can watch in Kobe's career where you can think anything other than God damn, does that guy want it. Kobe wanted to succeed as a basketball player more than anything. And it was that determination that makes him so beloved and appreciated. That mentality that defines Kobe Bryant's legacy. I decided on the structure that I wanted for this video about 2 weeks ago, and at the end of that structure is what you are watching right now. The part where I talk about what Kobe meant to me. I decided to put this last because one, most people who watch this video are rightfully not going to really care about me, and I completely understand that. And two, trying to find the words to describe what Kobe Bryant meant to me has been difficult for over a year now. Conveying what my childhood hero meant to me has been a rather daunting task, but I think looking at it now, I did a pretty good job, so here it goes. My journey as an NBA fan and a basketball fan was rather odd because I didn't watch the NBA until I was about 12, but I was a Kobe fan ever since I was around 8 or 9. Because at that age, while I was not watching it at the professional level, I very much enjoyed playing it and dreamed to one day play at that professional level. So as any 9-year-old in 2009 who wanted to get better at basketball would do, I went straight to YouTube, where I would discover multiple mixes of Kobe Bryant, footage of him both just being an awesome player as well as some motivational talks, some lessons at basketball, and this really just brought me down a rabbit hole of wow, this guy is really cool. And as a result of that, Kobe quickly became the guy for me trying to become a better basketball player, but while I had not realized it yet, subconsciously, it also became the guy for me trying to better myself as a person in general. When I was in middle school, it was my dream to be an NBA player. I just had two problems. One, I do not have an ounce, and I mean even a drop of athleticism in my blood. But two, I've always naturally been kind of lazy. Even things that I would enjoy doing, I would procrastinate just because my natural instinct was to do nothing over even doing something I enjoyed. Just being kind of naturally lazy is something that I've always dealt with and still do to this day, and I don't know if there's some underlying mental thing there. There probably is. Feel free to diagnose me in the comments section. I just think this is kind of who I am. Motivation is something that is not easy for me to acquire, and just kind of sitting around and doing nothing is something that I very much enjoy. And that mindset and way of being was obviously quite contradictory to being an NBA player, so my goals and kind of who I was were in conflict. So that's something that I have struggled to conquer, and back then when I was trying to conquer that, I decided that the best way to do that would be by watching motivational videos from Kobe Bryant. I would go on YouTube, look up Kobe Inspiration Mix, and it would be just a compilation of his highlights, maybe him working out, just some quotes that he had said, and then whatever rap song or pop song was popular in 2012. I used Kobe and his mentality as a counter to my natural way of being. When I couldn't motivate myself, I had Kobe Bryant to motivate me. But, well, what is that story actually worth? Because clearly I am not an NBA player right now. Hell, I'm not even in good shape for an average person. And I wouldn't even say that my basketball skill is more than probably around average for somebody who plays as much as I do. But the thing about that is, You do not need to be a basketball player for Kobe and his lessons and his mentality to have impacted you. In middle school, I was probably taking something like 300 shots per day as a result of Kobe, just trying to get my game to the highest level that I could. Taking a bunch of fadeaways in my driveway, as I'm sure many of y'all did if you're watching this video. And I mean, that fadeaway tendency has stuck around if you watched my 100K special. That's kind of my go-to. Even though those 300 shots per day that I was taking didn't amount to anything in terms of my NBA career, the fact that I, as the person that I was at the time, was going out there and putting in that work, despite that being what I was telling myself I didn't want to do, even though I also didn't, was a testament to what Kobe's impact was on me. And to this day, even though, again, not an NBA player, I still have that tendency and that natural inclining in the back of my head that says, hey, let's just not do anything today. And even though I still have bad days, and there are days where I fail to conquer that, for the most part, I would say I am drastically better at pushing through and being very efficient and working hard when I need to. I cranked out this documentary edit job after staying up for about 30 hours. So Mamba mentality, bitch. See, Kobe has this specific quote that I put at the start of this video that I decided that I was going to live by a while ago. When you make a choice and you say, come hell or high water, I am going to be this, do not be surprised when you are that. In my case, it's obviously not basketball, but for me, at a certain point in my life, I decided that what I am doing right now is what I wanted to do for a living. And one day, I decided, come hell or high water, I don't know what that actually means, but Kobe said it, so I'm taking it. Come hell or high water, I am going to be a YouTuber. I am going to be an NBA YouTuber. I am going to find success at this. And even when I had 100 subs, I was treating this shit like a job because that's what I wanted so badly. And now that I am sitting at now 130K by the time this video is coming out, I am not surprised that I am here. I am grateful and I acknowledge the luck that I have, but I know that I put in that work to get here. I sure as shit am not the crowning example of someone who took Kobe's mentality and turned it into something for themselves. I don't live up to Kobe's standards, nor do 95% of people in the world. But I can say, because of Kobe Bryant, at the end of each day, I think about how I can make the next day better. I think about how I can make the next year better. I think about how I can make the next video better. All of that stuff, I'm constantly thinking of how to be better, and that's thanks to Kobe Bryant. I still do not accomplish that every day. I cannot say that every day of my life gets progressively better, but I will say that Kobe instilled that mentality and that work ethic in me, and I'm very grateful for that. When I was younger, I really did not have a direction, and thanks to Kobe Bryant, I now have one. I will never properly, fully put into words what Kobe meant to me, but I think I did about as good of a job as I can right there. And once this video is up in a couple of days, I'm probably going to be thinking about how I could have made this summary and this video better, and that is because of Kobe. So I'm just going to end this video saying something that I wish I could have said to him in person at some point, but tragically never will. Thank you, Kobe Bryant.
Have a good time. Enjoy life. It's life is too short to get bogged down, to be discouraged, or you have to keep moving. You have to keep going. Put one foot in front of the other, smile, and just keep on rolling.